In this video, I'm going to be going over an amazing Bible manuscript that dates all the way back to the 12th century. That makes this around 900 years old, which of course is very old for a manuscript. It's a beautiful item, so you want to watch a full video to see what exactly that item looks like. Stick around to the end to see it in more detail, and also enjoy a dramatized story about events that took place during the time this Bible was produced. But I also will give some warnings, as this is a more scary, creepy type of story with some frightening imagery and sound effects to accompany it. So of course, some viewer discretion is advised, and of course, enjoy the story. The Abbey of Farfa had stood for centuries, its stone wall weathered by time, its grand halls once filled with the songs of devout monks. By the 12th century, something had changed. The monastery, once a beacon of faith and learning, had grown quiet. The great library gathered dust. The cloisters echoed with footsteps that never seemed to belong to anyone. And at night, when the wind carried the scent of rain through the Sabine hills, the monks whispered of something moving beneath the earth. Brother Matteo had always dismissed such fears. He was not like the others, young, eager to prove his faith, and unwilling to entertain the superstitions that had taken hold of the abbey. The older monks spoke of curses, of the restless dead, of a presence lurking in the crypts below. Fear, he told himself, was the tool of the weak. But then, Brother Angelo had vanished. Angelo had been one of the most faithful monks in the abbey, a man of quiet devotion. And yet, in the days before his disappearance, he had changed. He had become distant, muttering to himself in hushed tones, his eyes hollow and rimmed with sleeplessness. He would tell his brother Matteo how these voices would call to him. And he would elaborate further about how these voices came from beneath the stone. Matteo, scoffing at this, would tell his brother that he just needs to rest. But Angelo had only responded with a blank stare and pale face, asking if Matteo heard them. That night, after the others had gone to their cells, Angelo had walked into the crypts beneath the abbey, from which he would never return. Now 2 nights later, Matteo stood at the entrance to the underground tunnels, a single candlelight flickering in his hand to illuminate the dark spaces. The door was ancient, its iron hinges rusted, the wood scarred with age. The other monks had begged him not to go. No one who enters the crypts come back, they warned him. But Matteo had to know. He needed to know what happened to his dear friend Angelo. The door groaned open, the darkness swallowing him in as he took each step forward. The air in the crypts was thick and damp, clinging to his skin like unseen fingers. The stone walls were slick with moisture, the scent of old decay filling his lungs. He could hear nothing but his own breath, his footsteps on the cold, damp floor. Then, in the quiet darkness, a whisper, soft and breathless, not from behind him or from above him, but from beneath his feet. Matteo stopped, his pulse pounding in his ears. Slowly he would crouch down, pressing his ear to the cold, dark stone.
Help us!
The voice was faint, so quiet he thought it was a figment of his imagination. But it was there, a whisper from the depths of the earth. He stumbled back, nearly dropping the candle, the only source of light in this dark space. His breath came in ragged gasps. A scraping sound came from the far end of the chamber, a slow, deliberate movement like something dragging itself forward. Matteo's candlelight, flickering against the stone walls, was the only thing to illuminate what he would see at the end of the corridor. A figure, standing there in the shadows, motionless, watching and waiting. It wore a monk's robe, the fabric tattered and stained with time, but Matteo could see its hands, pale, skeletal fingers gripping the edge of a tomb. With his voice caught in his throat, he struggled to call out, "Brother Angelo?" The figure took a step forward, the candlelight in his hands trembling as he shook in fear. Then the hood slipped back. It was not Angelo. It wasn't even human. The face beneath was a rotting mask of flesh stretched over bone, hollow eye sockets staring into his very soul. The mouth opened wide, and the chanting began. A sound not meant for mortal ears. In a response of fear, he dropped his candle, eliminating his only source of light in this darkness, which would result in the darkness swallowing him whole. And the last thing Brother Matteo heard was the whispering rising from beneath the stone. By morning, the monks found Matteo's cloak at the entrance of the crypts, but of the man himself there was no sign. Just like Brother Angelo, and just like the others, he would disappear. From that night forward, no one dared enter the tunnels beneath Farfa Abbey, but still, on stormy nights, the villagers in the valley below swear they saw strange lights hovering above the monastery, pale, flickering torches that moved like they were searching for something or someone. And if you listen carefully, when the wind howls through the hills, you might just hear them, the voices trapped beneath the stone, still whispering and still waiting. Now, it of course is a very interesting story, and there's definitely some elements of it that are not true. For example, Matteo and Angelo are fictional characters that are based upon the descriptions that we have of different people or the beliefs that were happening during the 12th century when these events allegedly took place. So it's something that definitely warrants some more research and study. I certainly enjoyed looking into it, and I would encourage you to do the same. Now, the manuscript I have in my collection is not tied to that event directly, but there are two specific overlaps, i.e. they're both from the 12th century. So the manuscript I have was produced in the 12th century, just like the story or events took place in, and it's also produced in Italy, which is the location of this event, Farfa Abbey. So really interesting to see that. Just a fun way to introduce this particular manuscript. I found it very enjoyable, so I hope you enjoyed that as well. But this manuscript here is a Bible manuscript, so it's not liturgical. It's actually scripture, something that I absolutely love having in my collection. Now, I will say I do have this one for sale on my eBay shop, so you can check out the link below in the description, or you can email me at the email in the description for a discounted price where we can have a transaction directly. So if you're interested, be sure to message me about that. But it's still an amazing item. What I really like about this piece is the clean and crisp text on there. Oftentimes with manuscripts, especially this age, you'll have the text fading and it makes it very difficult to make out the script on there. For example, I have this manuscript fragment here from the 13th century, which has really faint text on there. It's very difficult to make out, something that you would more likely need UV lighting for, or a better setting where you can read it a lot clearer. But it's still legible, but just much lighter, similar to this manuscript fragment here. Very light text from its age and potentially from when it was used as a book binding. Probably the adhesive or something like that would have caused it to become more dull in its lettering. So what I like about this is even though this particular manuscript was recovered from a book binding, it has still maintained its integrity with that nice clean and dark lettering on there. When I compare the two side by side, you can see the stark contrast or difference between the two items. So really appreciate it for that. You also have these really nice rubrications throughout. That's those red slashes, which have again maintained their nice vibrant colors, which is a detail that I've really appreciated about this. Now the script that's on here is Carolingian minuscule because this is dated to the early 12th century. So closer to that 900 years old because it's in probably the first quarter. So it actually would be right at 900 years old because of course it's 2025. So you give a few years of wiggle room within that, but still a very old and amazing manuscript. Now this was recovered from a book binding. You can tell because of the way it was folded at certain points of the manuscript. You have these three dark lines which indicate that it was folded around a book board. Now I talk a lot about these different manuscripts in my collection that have been recovered from book bindings, but it's hard to visualize that. I do put up some pictures, but I finally purchased a book that has a manuscript as its binding. So the manuscript I have would be something like this. Here is a book from the 1700s. It's a theology book, which has this liturgical manuscript for its binding. It's a really interesting piece. I got it as a study tool because it's demonstrating how those manuscripts were used as binding. So you would take the old manuscript, put it onto the book board, fold the pieces on the sides, and then glue it, which would then make a very sturdy and durable binding because of course these are made from animal skin, so it's essentially a leather binding. So that's what we can see happen with this particular manuscript here being folded and cut to fit the book boards. Now some people might think that's wasteful, but it was actually really smart for them to do that because once these Bibles or manuscripts were no longer in use, or maybe they were destroyed or dilapidated or something like that, they would repurpose them because they were strong and durable and they would last for a long time. And I personally am very thankful that they did that, because it allows people like me to collect these amazing pieces of history and put them into my collection. So an amazing item. I've really enjoyed having it. The passage that's found on this particular manuscript comes from the book of Judges, specifically Judges 18, which talks about Canaan as the promised land and Israel as God's promise of salvation. So really cool to have this one. It's a very simple manuscript, but still an excellent piece, something that I really enjoy. And if it never sells, well, I still love it and I enjoy having it in my collection, but I'm sure it will sell because it is truly an amazing piece of history. But that's really all I have for this particular manuscript. If I don't sell it, I may do another one in the future on this particular item, so of course subscribe so you don't miss out on videos like that. You can also check out my other long-form videos where I go over a wide variety of Bibles over different centuries and talk about its historical context and settings. Really interesting to see that, so of course check those videos out. Stick around for those close-up shots, and I'll see you guys in the next video.